In the sprawling plains of 1880's Wyoming Territory, Sarah Blackwood arrived with nothing but hope in her heart and a small carpetbag in her trembling hands. A mail-order bride from Boston, she carried a secret that would soon shatter her dreams. She was deaf from birth. When her intended groom discovered her condition, his cruel rejection left her stranded in a town where silence meant isolation. But fate had other plans. Among the weathered faces at the crowded train station stood James Cooper, a quiet rancher whose gentle eyes held more kindness than judgment. While others whispered and stared, he saw beyond her silence to something that stirred his soul. Could a man who rarely spoke and a woman who couldn't hear find a language all their own? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Sarah Blackwood sat in her father's Boston study, her fingers tracing the edges of a newspaper clipping that would change her life. The marriage advertisement seemed to glow with promise in the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. Seeking refined Eastern lady for marriage. Successful ranch owner. Christian values. Thomas Wheeler, Wyoming Territory. Her father's weathered hands trembled as he read Thomas Wheeler's latest letter for the 3rd time. The correspondence had flowed steadily over 2 months. Each letter, from Wyoming, painting a picture of stability and respectability that seemed too good to refuse. Sarah watched his expression carefully, reading the concern etched in every line of his face. "My dearest girl," he signed, his movements deliberate and heavy with emotion. "Are you certain this is what you want?" Sarah smoothed her dark blue skirt, gathering her courage. At 26, she'd watched her younger sisters marry, had endured. The pitying glances at church socials, had felt the weight of being poor deaf Sarah grow heavier with each passing year. In Boston, her world had shrunk to the confines of her father's house, where even the servants spoke to her through him. She lifted her hands, signing with determination. "I want a life of my own, Father." Mr. Wheeler writes beautifully. He speaks of building something together, of needing a partner, not just a wife. He values education. He asked about my reading, my interests. He's different. Her father's study suddenly seemed too small. Its familiar shelves of leather-bound books and scent of pipe tobacco no longer comforting but confining. Through the window, she could see the garden where her mother had first taught her to spell words with her fingers, before the fever took her. Sarah had been 12 then, already in her silent world for as long as she could remember. "But Sarah," her father signed, "you haven't told him about your—" His hands faltered. "My deafness?" Sarah's gestures were sharp, decisive. "I will. When we meet, when he can see me, know me as a person first. Please, Father, trust me in this." The elderly man's shoulders sagged. He reached for the marriage agreement letter that had arrived that morning, its official letterhead bearing the seal of Wyoming Territory. His pen scratched across the bottom, adding his blessing to Sarah's own signature. That night, as Sarah packed her carpetbag, she came across her mother's old cameo brooch. She pinned it to her traveling dress, imagining her mother's approval. The brooch became her talisman during the long journey west. 6 days of railroad cars clacking beneath her feet, vibrations she could feel but never hear. She wrote in her journal each evening, documenting the changing landscape outside her window. The neat brownstones of Boston gave way to endless prairie, each sunset painting the sky in colors she'd never seen back east. Her fellow passengers were kind, if distant, assuming her silence was mere shyness rather than necessity. In her last letter to Thomas Wheeler, posted from a stop in Chicago, she'd nearly confessed her secret, but fear had stayed her hand. "Soon," she told herself, "soon he'll know me, and it won't matter so much." The train whistle she couldn't hear announced their arrival in Wyoming Territory, and Sarah gathered her meager belongings with trembling hands. Through the window, she could see the wooden platform of the station, crowded with people. Somewhere in that crowd waited Thomas Wheeler, and with him she prayed, the beginning of her new life. She straightened her spine, checked her hair in the small mirror of her powder compact, and touched her mother's brooch for courage. Whatever came next, she would face it with grace. After all, she was a Blackwood, and Blackwoods didn't falter in the face of challenges. Her mother had taught her that, in the language of loving hands and unwavering spirit. Sarah stepped onto the wooden platform, her carpetbag clutched close. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the station, and dust motes danced in the golden light. She recognized Thomas Wheeler immediately from the daguerreotype he'd sent, tall, well-dressed, with a carefully trimmed mustache. He stood near the station master's office, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Their eyes met across the crowded platform. Thomas smiled, starting forward, and Sarah's heart lifted. But as he drew closer, speaking words she couldn't see clearly enough to read, her practiced greeting died in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, planned to explain, with carefully written cards and graceful gestures. Instead, panic seized her. Thomas's smile faltered as she gestured awkwardly, trying to communicate. She fumbled in her reticule for the cards she'd prepared, but her trembling fingers scattered them across the platform. As she bent to retrieve them, she caught fragments of conversation from the gathering crowd. Poor man. She's simple, dumb, as a post. Another Eastern mistake. Thomas's face had transformed, his handsome features twisted with understanding and revulsion. He spoke rapidly to the station master, his gestures sharp and angry. Sarah couldn't follow his words, but she read rejection in every line of his body. The wildflowers lay forgotten in the dust. The station master approached, holding out a piece of paper. Sarah recognized it instantly, a return ticket to Boston, hastily purchased. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in public. Throughout her life, she had faced rejection with dignity. She would do so now, but as she reached for the ticket, a movement caught her eye. A tall man in worn ranch clothes stood apart from the murmuring crowd. Unlike the others, he wasn't whispering or pointing. His eyes, a startling shade of blue beneath his weathered hat brim, held something she hadn't seen in any face since leaving Boston, understanding. The man, she would later learn his name was James Cooper, didn't try to speak to her. He simply watched, his presence somehow steadying in the chaos of the moment. When Thomas stormed away, pushing through the crowd without a backward glance, the stranger's gaze followed him with quiet disapproval. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding in-house proprietor, appeared at Sarah's elbow. The older woman's face was kind as she gathered Sarah's scattered cards, pressing them back into her hands. She pointed to herself, then to Sarah, then toward the street, her meaning clear. "Come with me." As they walked away from the station, Sarah felt the weight of stares on her back. But she also felt something else, the steady gaze of the quiet man, watching until they turned the corner. In that moment, though she didn't know it yet, the first thread of a new possibility was spun. The boarding house room was small, but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the dusty main street. Mrs. Henderson lit the lamp, its warm glow softening the stark reality of Sarah's situation. On the small writing desk lay a sheet of the boarding house's letterhead paper, placed there with obvious intent. Sarah sat heavily on the bed, finally allowing her tears to fall. The return ticket lay on the nightstand, a symbol of dreams shattered. But as she watched the sunset paint the unfamiliar Wyoming sky, she felt an unexpected flicker of defiance. She had come west to build a new life. Perhaps not the one she'd imagined, but she was still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing her path. Through the window, she could see the evening activity of the town, shopkeepers closing up, cowboys heading to the saloon, ladies in fine dresses promenading with their husbands. And there, moving with unhurried grace through the crowd, was the man from the station. He paused beneath her window, looking up as if he sensed her watching. Their eyes met briefly, and he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture so gentle it made her heart ache. Sarah turned from the window and caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her mother's brooch glinted in the lamplight, and she straightened her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight she had a roof over her head and her dignity intact. It would have to be enough. James Cooper sat at his worn desk that evening, the lamp's glow illuminating the leather-bound journal where he recorded his thoughts. His calloused fingers, more accustomed to rope and reins than pen and paper, moved carefully across the page. As he wrote about the day's events, "Saw something today that stirred old memories," he wrote. "A young woman arrived on the afternoon train. The way the town turned on her reminded me too much of Catherine." He paused, remembering his sister deaf since birth, now raising her own family back east. Few in Wild River knew about Catherine. James wasn't one for sharing personal matters. The ranch house felt particularly empty tonight. Its silence, usually a comfort after long days, working with ranch hands and cattle, seemed to echo with the memory of the woman's dignified bearing in the face of cruelty. He'd recognized the shapes her hands made, not exactly like Catherine's. Signs, but similar enough to understand their meaning. James closed his journal, moving to the window. Beyond his own reflection, the night sky stretched vast and clear over the Wyoming plains. His ranch, the Double C, lay peaceful under starlight. 20 years of hard work had built this place, transformed it from raw prairie into one of the territory's most respected operations. Yet tonight, all he could think about was the look in that woman's eyes. Not defeat, but a fierce determination beneath her tears. The town's reaction hadn't surprised him. Wild River had its share of decent folks, but change came slow to frontier towns. He'd learned that lesson watching Catherine grow up, seeing how people shifted from discomfort to understanding once they took the time to know her. His parents had taught him early that patience and kindness weren't weaknesses, but the truest kind of strength. In the drawer of his desk lay Catherine's old primer, its pages worn soft with use. Their mother had used it to teach them both finger spelling, turning education into a family game. James had kept it all these years, though he seldom had cause to use the skills anymore. Now he found himself drawing it out, running his fingers over the embossed letters. Tomorrow would bring cattle to move, hands to manage, decisions to make. But tonight, James Cooper made a different kind of decision. He'd watched too many people turn away from things they didn't understand. Wild River might see a burden, a problem to be shipped back east. He saw a woman whose silence spoke of the same strength he'd witnessed in his sister. His journal lay open to a fresh page. "Maybe," he wrote, "it's time to remember what Mother taught us about building bridges across silence." The words were simple, but they felt like a commitment. James had never been one for grand gestures or quick decisions. His way was slower, steadier, like the rivers that carved paths through rocky ground, patient but persistent. As he prepared for bed, his mind was already forming plans. Mrs. Henderson, he knew, would ensure the young woman's immediate comfort. Tomorrow, he would begin the careful work of offering what help he could, in a way that respected her dignity. Catherine had taught him that the worst kind of charity was the sort that diminished the receiver. In the quiet of his room, James practiced the finger spelling he hadn't used in years. His hands were stiffer now, the movements less fluid, but the memory remained in his muscles. Like his father always said, some skills were too valuable to forget, even if you didn't know when you'd need them again. The last thing he wrote in his journal that night was a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness. He didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be. The morning sun found Sarah at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, watching the boarding house owner knead bread dough with practiced hands. The familiar domestic rhythm reminded her of home, though the view through the window, cowboys leading horses down the dusty street, women in practical frontier dress rather than Boston finery, emphasized just how far she'd traveled from everything she knew. Her attention shifted as a shadow darkened the doorway. The man from yesterday, the one with the kind eyes, stood there, holding something flat and bound in leather. Mrs. Henderson's face brightened in recognition, and Sarah watched their lips move in greeting. The man's name, she learned from Mrs. Henderson's careful gestures at introduction, was James Cooper. He sat at the table, movements deliberate and unhurried, and opened what turned out to be a hand-drawn picture book. The first page showed a simple sketch of a house, a horse, and a man. Beneath it, in careful letters, "I have a ranch. Would you like to see it?" Sarah's heart quickened. She'd expected pity, or worse, the awkward avoidance she'd encountered all her life. Instead, this stranger had created something just for her. The drawings weren't sophisticated, clearly the work of someone more comfortable with practical tasks than artistry, but they showed thought, consideration. She nodded, then reached for her writing tablet. "You are very kind, Mr. Cooper," she wrote in her neat hand, "but I don't want charity." James shook his head, turning to another page. This one showed two people working side by side, one teaching the other. Below, "Not charity, exchange. You teach me your language, I teach you ranching." Mrs. Henderson watched their interaction with quiet approval, her bread forgotten on the board. Sarah studied James's face, looking for any sign of mockery or hidden agenda. She found only patience and something that looked like understanding. With slightly trembling fingers, Sarah demonstrated the sign for "thank you." James copied it carefully, his large hands surprisingly graceful in the movement. When he got it right, Sarah's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. They spent the next hour with the picture book, developing a rudimentary system of communication. James showed her drawings of ranch life, cattle, horses, daily tasks, and Sarah taught him the corresponding signs. She discovered he knew some finger spelling, though rusty with disuse, and her curiosity about this quiet rancher grew. When James had to leave for his afternoon duties, he left the picture book with her. Sarah spent hours studying it, adding her own notes and sketches in the margins. Each page revealed more thought than was immediately apparent. The drawings were arranged in a way that told stories, showed connections. That evening, as Sarah sat in the boarding house parlor, she overheard, through Mrs. Henderson's careful writing, the town's gossip. Some thought James Cooper had lost his mind, taking an interest in a deaf-mute woman. Others recalled his reputation for unexpected kindnesses, like the time he'd hired a one-armed veteran as his bookkeeper. But it was Mrs. Henderson's written comment that stayed with Sarah as she prepared for bed. "That man sees with his heart, more than his eyes, always has." Sarah touched the picture book's worn leather cover, thinking of the hands that had crafted its contents. In Boston, her world had been full of people who spoke beautiful words, while their eyes held pity or dismissal. Here was a man of few words, whose actions spoke volumes. The next morning, when James returned, Sarah was ready. She'd spent the night adding her own page to the book, a simple drawing of two people sitting at a table, sharing a meal. Below it, she'd written, "I would like to learn about ranch life." The smile that crossed James's weathered face made her feel, for the first time since arriving in Wyoming, that she might have found not just a teacher, but a friend. Word spread quickly through Wild River that a traveling teacher, Miss Augusta Wells, had arrived with the latest educational materials from back east. James Cooper was waiting at the station when she stepped down from the train, clutching her carpetbag and a wrapped package that would change everything. A sign language primer ordered specially from the Hartford School for the Deaf. In his ranch office that evening, James spread the primer on his desk, its fresh pages promising new possibilities. Miss Wells sat across from him, her spectacles catching the lamplight as she demonstrated the proper hand positions. "The manual alphabet is just the beginning, Mr. Cooper," she explained. "True sign language is a dance of meaning, a poetry of motion." The lessons began in earnest. James's calloused fingers, more accustomed to rope and reins, struggled with the delicate movements at first. But each evening, after the ranch hands had turned in, he practiced until the oil lamp burned low. The primer became his constant companion. Its pages soon dog-eared and marked with his notes. Sarah noticed the change in their daily meetings. James's gestures grew more confident, less reliant on their picture book. One morning, as they walked through the ranch's kitchen garden, he signed a complete sentence for the first time. "The tomatoes are growing well." Sarah's face lit up with such joy that James felt his heart skip a beat. Their lessons took on a rhythm of their own. Sarah would teach James new signs while he introduced her to ranch life. She proved to have a natural way with the horses, their sensitive natures responding to her gentle touch and visual commands. The ranch hands, initially skeptical, came to respect the quiet woman who could calm a spooked horse with just her presence. Not everyone approved of their growing friendship. Thomas Wheeler, still smarting from his public embarrassment, made his opinions known at the saloon. "Cooper's making a fool of himself," he declared one evening, "learning to talk with his hands, like some circus performer." But James paid no mind to the gossip. Each small victory in communication felt more valuable than any social standing. The day Sarah taught him to sign "friend," he practiced it until his shoulders ached, wanting to get it exactly right. When he finally mastered it, her proud smile was worth every moment of effort. Miss Wells observed their progress with quiet approval. "You have a gift for this, Mr. Cooper," she noted during one lesson. "Not everyone has the patience to build bridges across silence." The primer became more than just a book. It became a symbol of possibility. Sarah added her own annotations. In the margins, drawing connections between signs and their meanings that helped James understand the language's deeper structure. Together, they developed their own variations, signs specific to ranch life that wouldn't be found in any formal text. One evening, as sunset painted the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and purple, James signed a question that had been forming in his mind. "Would you like to stay, help with the ranch?" His movements were careful, deliberate, wanting to be clearly understood. Sarah's response came without hesitation, her hands flowing through the signs they'd practiced together. "I would like that very much." Then with a small smile, she taught him a new sign, home. That night, James added the day's events to his journal, the primer resting beside it on his desk. The simple book had opened a door between two worlds, creating a language of understanding where before there had been only silence. As he wrote, he realized that in learning to speak with his hands, he'd found a voice he never knew he needed. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the ranch carrying fresh-baked bread from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen. James greeted her with newly learned signs, and together they began their day's work, their shadows moving in harmony across the sun-drenched yard. The primer lay open on the office desk, its pages now worn with use, but its promise very much alive. The ranch ledger told the story of their growing partnership in columns of neat figures and brief notations. SB suggested new feed rotation, cattle responding well. SB's organization system implemented in storage barn. SB's medical knowledge saved mare and foal. Each entry, written in James's steady hand, documented Sarah's transformation from visitor to essential part of ranch life. Dawn found them sharing coffee in the ranch house kitchen, steam rising from thick mugs as they planned the day's work. Their morning ritual had evolved naturally, Sarah's Boston-bred attention to detail, complementing James's years of practical experience. She'd developed a system of colored ribbons to mark different pasture rotations, something the ranch hands quickly adopted after seeing its effectiveness. Their conversations flowed more smoothly now, a blend of traditional signs, their own invented gestures, and the occasional written note. Sarah had taught James to sign "stubborn as a mule," which he used whenever she insisted on finishing a task despite the setting sun. She, in turn, learned to read his mood in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands moved more deliberately. When he was worried about the weather or a sick animal, the ranch hands adapted to their unique form of communication with surprising ease. Young Tommy, the newest hire, proved especially eager to learn signing, his quick fingers picking up the language almost as fast as James. The others followed suit, creating an environment where silence didn't mean isolation. One particularly memorable morning, Sarah introduced a new system for tracking breeding lines in the horse program. James watched as she spread papers across his office desk, her fingers flying through explanations of how proper bloodline documentation could improve their stock. Her face glowed with enthusiasm, and James found himself mesmerized by the grace of her movements. In Boston, she signed, I helped father with his business records. Organization is like a language itself. Everything must flow together. James nodded, understanding how her years of working around communication barriers had made her exceptionally skilled at creating systems others could easily follow. The ledger recorded unexpected moments too. SB played piano in parlor. Ranch hands said vibrations helped them sleep. Sarah had discovered the old upright piano in the ranch house's rarely used parlor. Though she couldn't hear the notes, she could feel the vibrations through the wooden floor, and her playing brought an unexpected touch of gentility to the frontier evenings. Their shared meals became lessons in themselves. Sarah taught James the signs for different foods, while he introduced her to Western cooking. The kitchen, once a purely functional space, grew warm with shared jokes and silent laughter. Mrs. Henderson, visiting one afternoon, remarked that she'd never seen the ranch house feel so much like a home. Even the difficulties were noted in the ledger's pages. Storm damaged north fence. SB's warning saved entire herd. Sarah had felt the changing air pressure that preceded the storm, recognizing the signs from years of observation. Her urgent gestures had gotten the cattle to shelter just before. The sky broke open. The ranch's reputation grew under their joint stewardship. Buyers commented on the exceptional organization of their records, the obvious care taken with the animals. Few realized that the efficient systems they admired had sprung from the partnership between a deaf woman and a rancher who'd learned to listen with his eyes. As summer deepened into autumn, the ledger's entries reflected a subtle shift. James began referring to decisions as ours rather than mine. Sarah's initials appeared more frequently, her suggestions and contributions woven seamlessly into the ranch's daily operations. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky, Sarah noticed James making a new entry in the ledger. "What are you writing?" she signed. He smiled and turned the book so she could see. "SB has made the double C better than it ever was before. Some things don't need words to be understood." Sarah's fingers traced the words, feeling the slight indentations his pen had left in the paper. In Boston, she had dreamed of finding purpose. Here, in the quiet partnership recorded in this leather-bound book, she had found something far more precious. She had found belonging. The damaged barn door would long stand as a testament to that fateful night, its splintered wood and hastily repaired hinges telling a story of nature's fury and human resilience. The storm had come without warning, rolling across the Wyoming, plains like a stampeding herd, turning afternoon to premature night. Sarah felt it first, the sharp drop in air pressure that made her ears ache. Standing in the corral, she watched the western sky turn an ominous green-black. The horses shifted nervously, their movements echoing the tension she felt in her bones. Without hesitation, she ran to the main house where James was reviewing contracts. Her urgent gestures needed no translation. "Storm coming! Big one!" James took one look at her face and sprang into action. Years of ranching had taught him to trust weather warnings, but he'd never seen such certainty in Sarah's expression. They moved as one, calling the hands, securing loose equipment, and herding livestock toward shelter. The wind hit first, driving stinging particles of dust before it. Sarah's skirts whipped around her legs as she helped guide the frightened horses into the barn. She couldn't hear the thunder, but she felt each boom vibrate through the ground and into her chest. Lightning turned the world into stark snapshots. of chaos, James directing ranch hands, cattle crowding into the lower pasture's natural windbreak, tumbleweeds flying past like possessed things. The main barn door, weathered from decades of Wyoming seasons, began to crack under the storm's assault. James spotted the danger first. If that door gave way, panicked horses could bolt into the storm. He grabbed Sarah's arm, pointing to the problem. Understanding flashed between them. Together, they fought their way across the yard. Rain now fell, in sheets so heavy they could barely see. Sarah's hair had come loose, plastering against her face, but her movements remained sure and purposeful. They reached the barn. Just as the door's upper hinge gave way with a crack, Sarah felt through. Her palms pressed against the wood. James signed quickly, rain dripping from his hands. "Need rope. Brace door." Sarah nodded, already moving. Years of ranch work had taught her where every tool was kept. She returned with heavy rope and James's strongest lariat. Their hands worked in concert, weaving an improvised brace to hold the massive door. Each lightning flash illuminated their progress, Sarah holding the door steady against the wind's fury, James securing the rope with knots tested by years of ranch work. A particularly violent gust caught the door, slamming it back. Sarah moved without thinking, pushing James clear even as the door's edge caught her shoulder. Pain flared, but she kept her grip. She saw James's face transform with fear and something else, something that made her heart race faster than any storm. Together they threw their weight against the door. Ranch hands arrived with more rope and wooden braces. Through it all, Sarah and James remained anchored to each other, their bodies finding natural rhythm in the chaos. When Sarah's injured shoulder began to falter, James shifted seamlessly to take more of the weight. When he needed to direct the hands, Sarah anticipated and adjusted her position to compensate. Hours passed in a blur of wind, rain, and desperate work. Finally, the storm began to abate. As the hands dispersed to check for damage, Sarah and James remained by the barn door, their improvised repairs holding steady. In the relative calm, James turned to her, his hands gentle as they shaped the signs. "You're hurt." Sarah shook her head, dismissing his concern, but James insisted on examining her shoulder. His touch was careful, professional, yet Sarah felt each point of contact like tiny electrical storms against her skin. Lightning still flickered on the horizon, but the air between them carried a different kind of charge. "Thank you," James signed, his fingers trembling slightly, "for pushing me clear." Sarah's response was simple. Partners protect each other. The word partners hung between them, carrying more weight than either had intended. In the barn's shadows, surrounded by the evidence of their shared battle against nature's fury, something shifted in their relationship. The damaged door they'd fought to secure had opened something else, a recognition of how seamlessly they'd worked together, how naturally they'd trusted each other's instincts. Later, after the animals were settled and the immediate dangers had passed, they sat on the porch watching the storm's retreat. Their clothes were still damp, and Sarah's shoulder would be spectacular shades of purple come morning, but neither moved to go inside. James had brought them coffee, and Sarah could feel the warmth of the cup seeping into her cold hands. "Never seen anyone handle themselves so well in a storm," James signed, his movements illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the house windows. Sarah smiled, then winced as her shoulder protested. "Never had someone I trusted so completely at my side," she replied, her signs soft but clear. The damaged barn door would be properly repaired in the coming days, but its story would remain etched in both memory and wood, a testament to the night when crisis forged something stronger than partnership between a deaf woman and a quiet rancher who'd learned to speak with his hands. The letter from Sarah's father arrived on a crisp autumn morning, carried by the same train that had brought her west months ago. Inside the envelope, tucked alongside his careful handwriting, was a faded family photograph she'd never seen before. The image captured a moment frozen in time. Her mother seated in their Boston garden, hands moving in mid-sign, teaching a young Sarah the word for flower. Sarah sat in the ranch house parlor, the photograph trembling slightly in her hands. James found her there, morning light streaming through the windows, tears falling silently onto the aged paper. He didn't speak or sign immediately, just settled beside her on the small sofa, his presence steady and warm. "My mother," Sarah signed, finally touching the image gently. "She learned to sign the day the doctor confirmed my deafness, said if the world wouldn't speak to her daughter, she'd learn to speak to her daughter's world." James studied the photograph, noting the determination in the seated woman's face, the love evident in her posture as she leaned toward her child. The garden roses climbing the trellis behind them seemed to frame the moment in nature's own embrace. "Tell me about her?" James signed, his movements gentle, encouraging. Sarah's hands began to move, weaving the story of Eleanor Blackwood, a Boston society woman who'd scandalized her peers by refusing to send her deaf daughter away to an institution. "She turned our home into a school," Sarah signed, "learned everything she could about signing. Taught the servants, my sisters, even the neighborhood children." She paused, touching the photograph again. "She died when I was 12. Fever. The last thing she signed to me was Brave Heart." James's hands moved slowly, thoughtfully. "I have someone to tell you about too." He rose, crossing to his desk, and returned with a daguerreotype of his own, a young girl in a plain dress, her hands positioned in a familiar gesture. "Catherine," he signed. "My sister, born deaf like you." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. This explained so much, his knowledge of fingerspelling, his instant comprehension of her situation at the train station. "Where is she now?" "Maryland," James signed. "Married with 3 children. Teaching at a school for the deaf." His face softened with pride. "Our mother taught us all to sign, just like yours did. Said a family that couldn't communicate wasn't much of a family at all." Sarah looked between the 2 photographs now lying side by side, her mother in her Boston garden, James's sister in her plain frontier dress. 2 women who'd helped shape the people they'd become, connected across time and distance by love and determination. "After Mother died," Sarah signed, her movement speaking of old pain, "Father did his best, but the house grew so quiet. My sisters married, moved away. The servants slowly forgot their signs. It became a world of writing things down, of trying to read lips, of always being a step removed from life." James touched her hand gently, drawing her attention. "And now?" Sarah's smile was warm through her tears. "Now, I'm in a place where silence doesn't mean loneliness, where people learn my language instead of expecting me to learn theirs." She paused, gathering courage. "Oh, where one person in particular makes me feel heard without ever speaking a word." James's hands trembled slightly as he signed. Catherine always said there were many ways to hear with the heart. They sat together in the quiet morning light, the photographs bearing witness to their shared understanding. Sarah told him about learning to feel music through the floor beneath her mother's piano, about her father's patience with her endless questions, about the garden that had been her sanctuary. James shared stories of Catherine's childhood adventures, their mother's innovative teaching methods, the way their father had learned to stamp his boot on the floor to call them to dinner. When Sarah's father's letter was finally read, its contents seemed almost secondary to the gift that photograph had brought. He wrote of missing her, of hoping she'd found happiness in her Western adventure, but he also wrote of pride in her courage to seek her own path, to build her own world. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Sarah taught James a new sign, her mother's special gesture for Brave Heart. His large hands shaped the movement carefully, reverently, understanding its significance. The 2 photographs found a home together on the parlor wall, a testament to the women who had taught them that love speaks in many languages. They stood as silent witnesses to the truth both Sarah and James had discovered. Sometimes the strongest bonds are forged not in the spaces filled with words, but in the understanding that blooms in silence. The blue ribbon lay on Sarah's dresser, its gold lettering catching the morning light. First prize, Animal Husbandry, Wild River Harvest Fair, 1885. But its true value lay not in the award itself, but in what it represented. The day Sarah and James first stood together before the entire town, their partnership on display for all to see. The autumn fair had drawn people from 3 counties, turning Wild River's main street into a bustling carnival of activity. Bunting decorated every storefront, and the air was rich with the scent of fresh-baked pies and barbecue. Sarah felt the vibrations of a distant brass band through the wooden sidewalk as she and James made their way to the livestock exhibition area. They'd spent weeks preparing for this day. The Double C's prize mare, Star Dancer, was heavy with foal, and Sarah had developed a new method of monitoring the horse's health that combined her Boston medical knowledge with James's practical experience. Their documentation was meticulous, their presentation carefully planned through a combination of signs and written explanations. Ready? James signed, his fingers steady despite the crowd's curious stares. Sarah straightened her best dress, dark blue wool that matched her eyes, and nodded. Star Dancer nickered softly as they approached her stall, and Sarah felt the familiar warmth of the horse's greeting nuzzle against her palm. This was their moment to show Wild River that communication took many forms. The judges, 3 respected ranchers from neighboring counties, watched with initial skepticism as James and Sarah began their presentation. But skepticism turned to interest as they demonstrated their innovative approach to breeding records and care. Sarah's hands flew gracefully through the signs while James translated, their movements so synchronized it seemed like a dance. Notice how the mare responds to visual commands, James explained to the judges, while Sarah demonstrated. Star Dancer moved perfectly through her paces, responding to subtle gestures that any ranch hand could learn. Miss Blackwood's system means even a spooked horse can be calmed without voice commands, invaluable during storms or stampedes. From the corner of her eye, Sarah caught sight of Thomas Wheeler in the crowd, his face dark with remembered embarrassment. But something had changed in the months since that first cruel rejection at the train station. Now, surrounded by the results of her work at the Double C, Sarah felt only pity for a man who had been too blind to see past his own prejudices. The judge's deliberation took longer than usual. Sarah and James waited by Star Dancer's stall, their hands occasionally moving in private conversation that drew fascinated looks from passing children. Mrs. Henderson appeared with lemonade and quiet words of encouragement that James translated. With a smile, when the head judge approached with the blue ribbon, his weather-worn face split in a genuine smile. "Never seen anything quite like your system," he said, speaking slowly so Sarah could read his lips while James signed. "Could revolutionize how we handle stock across the territory." The ribbon ceremony drew a larger crowd than usual. Sarah felt the vibrations of applause through the wooden platform as she and James accepted the award together. But it was the moment after, when James spontaneously signed, "We did it," with such obvious joy that brought tears to her eyes. In that gesture was everything they'd achieved, not just the prize, but the respect of their peers, earned on their own terms. Later, as the fair wound down and lanterns began to twinkle, in the gathering dusk, they walked together through the fairgrounds. Children ran up to them, fascinated by their silent conversation, and Sarah found herself teaching simple signs to eager young learners. Even some of the mothers lingered, watching with thoughtful expressions as their children discovered a new way to communicate. "Think we changed some minds today," James signed as they sat sharing a piece of Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning apple pie. Sarah's response was interrupted by the arrival of the local newspaper editor, requesting a photograph of the innovative ranching partners with their award-winning mare. As they posed beside Star Dancer, the blue ribbon prominent in the shot, Sarah realized they were doing more than documenting a prize. They were showing the territory that success spoke in many languages. That evening, as James escorted her back. To Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, they paused on the porch. The fair's distant lights painted the sky in a gentle glow, and the autumn air was crisp with possibility. "Thank you," Sarah signed, "for helping me show them who I really am." James's response was simple, but filled with meaning. "You showed me." First, the blue ribbon would find a place of honor at the ranch house, not just as a testament to their innovative methods, but as a symbol of the day Wild River began to see what James had recognized that first day at the train station, that sometimes the strongest voices never make a sound. The handmade quilt grew beneath Sarah's fingers as autumn deepened toward winter, each carefully stitched square telling its own story. She worked on it during the lengthening evenings, sitting by the ranch house fire while James read or worked on his ledgers. The pattern was her mother's favorite, Morning Star, with its radiating diamond shapes suggesting light emerging from darkness. James's sister Catherine was due to visit before the first snow, and Sarah wanted the quilt to be perfect. She'd incorporated fabrics that spoke of their shared life, a square from her old Boston dress, a piece of James's worn workshirt, even a scrap of the blue ribbon backing from the fair. Each stitch helped transform the ranch house from James's bachelor residence into something warmer, more like home. "Your fingers are speaking," James signed one evening watching her work. He'd noticed how her gestures became more fluid after hours of quilting, as if the rhythm of the needle loosened something in her hands. Sarah smiled, setting aside her work. "Mother always said quilting was another kind of language. Each pattern tells a story." She traced the star pattern, then signed, "This one means hope." The preparation for Catherine's visit had brought changes to the ranch house. Sarah had helped James convert his rarely used study into a guest room, their hands brushing as they hung fresh curtains and arranged furniture. Each touch seemed to linger longer than strictly necessary, carrying unspoken meanings neither was quite ready to voice. The first snow fell early that year, dusting the prairie in white silence. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, feeling the change in air pressure that preceded the storm. Behind her, James was teaching the ranch hands new signs for winter work, gestures for frozen, blizzard, shelter. Their dedication to learning her language still touched her deeply. "Storm coming," she signed to James when he joined her at the window. "Big one." He nodded, then surprised her by adding, "Like the storm that brought you here." The memory of that first devastating day at the train station had lost its sting, transformed by months of quiet joy and shared purpose. Sarah turned to face him fully, noting how the silver threading through his dark hair caught the winter light. "I was thinking," James signed, his movements carrying an unusual hesitancy, "perhaps you might consider staying on permanently. The ranch needs you." He paused, then added with careful fingers, "I need you." Sarah's heart quickened, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by a ranch hand announcing Catherine's arrival. The moment suspended between them, full of unfinished possibilities. Catherine Cooper proved to be a force of nature, her signing rapid and expressive as she embraced her brother and turned to meet Sarah. The similarities between siblings were striking. The same quiet strength, the same kindness in their eyes. Catherine took one look at how they moved around each other and smiled knowingly. That evening, as the women worked on the quilt together while James tended to ranch duties, Catherine shared stories of growing up with her brother. "He learned to sign before he learned to speak," she told Sarah, her hands painting pictures of a young James stubbornly practicing fingerspelling. "Mother said he had hands made for languages of all kinds." Sarah found herself sharing her own stories of Thomas's rejection, of James's picture book, of storms weathered together. Catherine listened with the deep understanding of someone who had walked a similar path, her fingers occasionally adding wisdom learned from her own journey. Later, after Catherine had retired to the guest room, Sarah and James sat before the fire. The quilt lay across their laps, nearly finished now. In the flickering light, Sarah gathered her courage. "About what you said earlier," she signed. "About staying." James's hands were steady as he responded. I should have said more. Should have said that the ranch isn't the same without you, that I'm not the same. Sarah touched the quilt, tracing the morning star pattern that seemed to glow in the firelight. In Boston, I dreamed of finding somewhere I truly belonged. Her signs were soft, intimate. I never dreamed I'd find someone I belonged with. James reached out, his calloused fingers gentle as they covered hers. In that touch was every word they hadn't yet signed, every possibility the winter held. Outside, snow continued to fall, wrapping the ranch in white silence. But in the warmth of the ranch house, two people who had learned to speak without words were finally beginning to say what their hearts had known for months. The quilt would be finished before Catherine's departure, its morning star pattern a testament to light found in unexpected places. It would grace their bed through many winters to come, gathering stories into its folds, a tangible piece of the language of love they had crafted together, stitch by careful stitch. The hand-carved wooden box sat hidden in James's desk drawer for weeks before he found the courage to give it to Sarah. He'd worked on it during the long winter evenings, each careful cut and smooth surface shaped by memories of their time together. The lid bore an intricate pattern of morning glory vines, Sarah's favorite flower from her mother's Boston garden, surrounding two intertwined hands, formed in the sign for forever. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay his mother's gold ring, resized by the town jeweler who'd kept his secret with a knowing smile. But it was the other contents that had occupied James's thoughts for months, carefully carved wooden. In tiles, each bearing a letter of the manual alphabet, arranged to spell out the most important question of his life. The perfect moment arrived on a crisp spring morning. Sarah was in the garden they'd planned together over the winter, plotting outrows for vegetables and flowers. The morning glory seeds she'd written home for had just arrived, and she was marking places where they would climb. James watched her from the porch, his heart full. She'd brought so much to his life, not just organization and innovation to the ranch, but warmth and understanding he'd never known he was missing. Her presence had transformed the Double C from a successful business into a true home. He touched the box in his pocket, remembering Catherine's words during her visit. Don't just ask her, James. Show her. Speak her language in every way you can. Sarah looked up as he approached, her smile brightening the already sunny day. She'd taken to wearing her dark hair looser, frontier style, and a strand had escaped to curl against her cheek. James resisted the urge to brush it back. Instead, signing, "Walk with me," they strolled to their favorite spot, a small rise overlooking the ranch where wildflowers had just begun to bloom. Sarah had once told him it reminded her of the secret garden in her favorite childhood book, a place where magic could happen. James's hands trembled slightly as he began to sign. Do you remember the first sign you taught me? Sarah nodded, demonstrating. Thank you. I've thanked God every day since, he continued, his movements deliberate, wanting to be perfectly understood, for bringing you to Wild River, for giving me the chance to learn your language, to see the world through your eyes. Sarah's eyes widened as he drew out the wooden box. The morning sun caught the carved pattern, making the intertwined hands seem to move. When she traced the design with gentle fingers, James saw tears beginning to gather. Open it, he signed. The hinges he'd so carefully oiled moved smoothly. Sarah's breath caught as she saw the arranged tiles spelling out, "Will you marry me?" But James wasn't finished. He'd practiced this moment countless times, wanting to give her everything she deserved. His hands moved in the signs they'd developed, together, mixed with traditional ones she'd taught him. I love you not in spite of our differences, but because of them. You've taught me that silence can hold more meaning than words, that understanding comes in many forms. You make me want to learn a new sign every day, just to find more ways to tell you what you mean to me. Sarah's tears were falling freely. Now, but her smile was radiant. James lifted the ring from its nest of tiles, then signed one-handed. Catherine helped me learn the signs for wedding vows. I want to speak them in your language, make promises you can see and feel. He took a Deep breath, then continued, I'm not just asking you to be my wife. I'm asking you to help me build something unique. A home where silence and speech live together, where our children will grow up knowing both our languages, where love doesn't need words to be understood. Sarah set the box carefully on a nearby rock, her hands shaking as she signed, Children? James nodded. I've been corresponding with the school where Catherine teaches. They've sent information about raising children in both worlds. I want to be ready to do this right. Sarah's response came in a rush of signs. You've thought of everything, almost everything, he signed back. I haven't heard your answer yet. Sarah looked at the ring, the carved box, the man who had learned to speak with his hands just to reach her heart. Her response combined signs with the finger spelling they'd first shared. Y-E-S, 1,000 times, yes. James's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then, with movements they'd both come to treasure, he signed the words that had brought them to this moment. Thank you. Sarah's laugh was silent, but felt like music. She lifted her hands to show him a new sign, one her mother had used. She later explained, only for moments of perfect joy. In the spring sunshine, surrounded by wildflowers and promise, they added it to their growing language of love. The wooden box would hold a place of honor in their home, gathering new treasures through the years. Their children's first signed words, pressed flowers from anniversary bouquets, small tokens of a life built on understanding. But its greatest treasure would always be the memory of this moment, when a quiet rancher and a deaf woman from Boston proved that love's truest proposals need no voice at all. The anonymous, threatening letter arrived on a Tuesday, its crude words scrawled in an attempt to disguise the hand that wrote them. A deaf woman can't be a proper rancher's wife. Leave Wild River before you bring shame to us all. Sarah found. It pushed under the boarding house door, its malicious intent clear even before Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled while reading it. That evening, in the ranch house parlor, James held the letter with hands that trembled with barely contained anger. His signs were sharp, emphatic. We'll find who wrote this, make them answer for it. But Sarah touched his arm, calming him with the gentle wisdom that had first drawn him to her. They fear what they don't understand, she signed, like Thomas did. The mention of Thomas Wheeler was apt, for he had become the voice of opposition to their engagement. The saloon buzzed with his predictions of doom. How could a deaf woman raise children, run a household, be a proper help to a rancher of James's? Standing. Yet for every voice raised in doubt, others spoke in support. Mrs. Henderson rallied the town's women, sharing stories of Sarah's capable management and kind heart. The ranch hands, now fluent in basic signs, testified to her invaluable contributions to the Double C's success. The letter wasn't the last. Others followed, each more spiteful than the last. But Sarah kept them all, tucked away in a drawer, refusing to let hatred drive her from the life she and James were building. Each one makes me more determined, she signed to him one evening. They think silence means weakness. We'll show them its strength. The real challenge came when Thomas Wheeler filed a formal protest with the territory clerk, claiming their marriage would be invalid due to Sarah's mental deficiency. The legal document, full of archaic language about competency and fitness, landed like a stone in their peaceful world. James rode into town immediately, his fury evident in every line of his body. But Sarah insisted on accompanying him to meet with Judge Harrison. In the judge's oak-paneled office, she presented her case with quiet dignity, writing her arguments in perfect penmanship while James translated her signs. I was born deaf. She wrote, not blind or simple. I graduated from the Hartford Female Seminary. I can read, write, and manage accounts. My condition affects my hearing, not my ability to think, feel, or love. Judge Harrison, a thoughtful man who had awarded them their blue ribbon at the fair, read her words carefully. Wheeler's protest, he said, speaking slowly so Sarah could read his lips while James signed, seems based more in prejudice than law. But the matter couldn't be settled quickly. Legal precedents needed to be researched, territorial statutes consulted. Their wedding plans hung in limbo, while the wheels of justice turned slowly. It was during this time that Sarah's father arrived unannounced from Boston, prompted by concerned letters from family friends who'd heard rumors of the controversy. Jonathan Blackwood stepped down from the stage, looking every inch the proper Easterner, his worry evident in the lines around his eyes. Sarah met him at Mrs. Henderson's, her back straight, her hands steady as she signed their news. To her surprise, her father's first question wasn't about the legal challenges or town gossip, but about James. Does he make you happy? The smile that lit Sarah's face needed no translation. Still, she signed, happier than I've ever been. He speaks to my heart, Father, in ways that go beyond words. Jonathan Blackwood spent the next week observing his daughter's life in Wild River. He watched her manage the ranch accounts with precision, saw how naturally she communicated with the hands through their shared signs, witnessed the respect she'd earned from most of the community. Most importantly, he saw how she and James moved together, their silent language of love and understanding speaking louder than any words could. The way James anticipated her needs, how Sarah could read his mood in the set of his shoulders, the gentle touches that conveyed volumes of meaning. When Thomas Wheeler attempted to approach him, hoping to gain an ally in his campaign against the marriage, Jonathan Blackwood's Boston reserve turned to steel. My daughter, he said clearly, ensuring Wheeler heard every word, has found what every parent wishes for their child, someone who sees her true worth. Your prejudice speaks only to your own limitations, sir, not hers. The anonymous letters continued to arrive, but their power to hurt diminished with each show of support. The ranch hands presented Sarah with a handmade book of illustrations showing all the signs they'd learned, proving her impact on their community. Mrs. Henderson organized a sewing circle where Sarah taught other women basic signs, building bridges, of understanding one gesture at a time. Through it all, the first threatening letter remained in its drawer, a reminder not of hatred's power, but of love's ability to overcome it. Sarah sometimes looked at it before bed, not with fear, but with something like pity for those who couldn't see that the strongest bonds are formed not by words spoken aloud, but by hearts beating in harmony. They think they can silence us. She signed to James one evening as they watched the sunset paint the prairie in defiant colors. But our love speaks louder than their fear. James's response was to teach her a new sign he'd created just for her, combining brave and heart into a single flowing motion that spoke of admiration and eternal devotion. In that gesture was every argument they would ever need against those who sought to keep them apart. Sarah's childhood diary lay open on the ranch house parlor table, its pages yellowed with age, but still clearly legible. Jonathan Blackwood had brought it west with him, along with other treasures from her Boston life. Now, in the quiet evening hours, the small book became a bridge between past and present, between father and future son-in-law. Eleanor, her mother, insisted Sarah keep it, Jonathan explained, his fingers tracing the careful handwriting. Said even if the world couldn't hear her voice, her words would always have power on the page. James leaned forward, studying the entry Sarah had written the day after losing her mother. The grief was evident in the way the letters pressed deep into the paper, but so was the strength that had carried her through. When I cannot speak my heart, I will write it, young Sarah had declared. When others cannot hear me, I will find new ways to be heard. Sarah, watching them from her seat by the fire, felt tears gather as James carefully translated passages into sign language for her. Some of the memories she'd forgotten came flooding back. Her mother's patient teachings, her father's quiet support, the small victories and struggles of a deaf child finding her way in a hearing world. There was so much I didn't understand. Then, Jonathan admitted, his eyes meeting his daughter's across the room, I thought sending you west was letting you go. I never imagined you'd find someone who would learn to hear with his heart. James's hands moved with gentle certainty. Sarah taught me that the loudest truths are often spoken in silence. The diary's pages held other revelations. Sarah's detailed observations of ranch life in her first months at the Double C showed how deeply she'd understood the work, how carefully she'd studied every aspect of her new world. Her father read these entries with growing appreciation for the life she'd built. "Show him the breeding records," Sarah signed to James, and he brought out their innovative tracking system. Jonathan, a businessman who appreciated efficiency, marveled at how they'd combined Sarah's organizational skills with traditional ranching methods. "You've created something remarkable here," he said, speaking and signing simultaneously, a skill he'd been practicing since his arrival. Not just a marriage, but a true partnership. Later that evening, as Sarah helped Mrs. Henderson with wedding preparations in town, James and Jonathan sat on the porch. The diary rested between them, a testament to the journey that had brought them all to this moment. "I worried," Jonathan confessed, "when she first wrote about you. Feared it might be another Thomas Wheeler situation, someone who saw her differences as flaws rather than gifts." James's response was measured, thoughtful. "When I first saw her at the station, I recognized something in her eyes. The same look Catherine, my sister, gets when she's determined to prove the world wrong about what she can do." Jonathan nodded, understanding. "Eleanor was like that too. Never let anyone tell her what our daughter couldn't do." He paused, then added softly, "She would have loved you, you know. Would have seen how you look at Sarah the same way I looked. At her mother, like you're seeing something precious no one else quite understands." James reached for the diary, opening to an entry Sarah had written just after the fair. Her words captured the moment she'd realized she was falling in love, not with grand gestures or spoken declarations, but with the quiet way James had learned to speak her language, to see her world. "I promise you," James signed, his movements carrying all the weight of a sacred vow, "I'll spend my life making sure she never feels unheard again." The elder Blackwood's eyes misted as he watched James's hands shape the words. He'd come west, prepared to protect his daughter, only to find she'd found someone who protected her heart while honoring her strength. When Sarah returned, she found them practicing signs together, the diary open between them as they shared stories of her childhood adventures. Her father's acceptance, written in every line of his face, was worth more than any legal victory over those who opposed their marriage. That night, adding a new entry to her childhood diary for the first time in years, Sarah wrote, "Today I watched the two men I love most in the world learn to speak each other's languages. Mother always said love finds its own ways to be heard. She was right, as she was about so many things." The diary would continue to gather stories, their wedding, their children's first signs, the growth of their dream of a school for the deaf. But perhaps its most important page would always be the one where a father learned to trust his daughter's heart, and a quiet rancher proved that some men speak loudest through the eloquence of understanding. The wedding bands gleamed in the morning light, their polished surfaces etched with delicate hands, forming the sign for love. James had commissioned them from a silversmith in Denver who worked with Catherine's school, each ring bearing the promise of their unique union, not just in words, but in the language of their hearts. The Double C's barn had been transformed for the occasion. Fresh-cut wildflowers and ribbons softened the sturdy beams, while morning sunlight streamed through the newly washed windows. Sarah stood before the small mirror in what had become her office, watching Mrs. Henderson pin her mother's lace veil into place. The older woman's eyes glistened as she stepped back, her hands forming the sign for beautiful that Sarah had taught her months ago. Outside, the wedding guests represented the bridge they'd built between their worlds. Catherine had brought several teachers and students from her school in Maryland, while Boston society mixed with Wyoming ranchers in the autumn sunshine. Even Thomas Wheeler had come, his recent letter of apology and blessing suggesting that time and exposure had softened his prejudices. Sarah's father waited at the office door, his eyes bright with tears as he saw her in her mother's restored wedding dress. "Eleanor would be so proud," he signed, his movements sure and confident now after weeks of practice. "She always said you'd find your own path to happiness." The ceremony they'd planned was unlike anything Wild River had seen before. Judge Harrison had worked with them to create a service that would honor both spoken and signed words, ensuring every vow and blessing would be understood by all. The ranch hands, now fluent in basic signs, would translate for hearing guests, while Catherine's colleagues would sign for the deaf students she'd brought west. As Sarah took her father's arm, she felt the vibrations of music through the wooden floor, a piano piece she'd chosen for its rhythm rather than its melody. The barn doors opened, revealing their gathered loved ones. But Sarah's eyes found only James, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, his hands moving in their private sign for Brave Heart. The traditional words of the ceremony were accompanied by flowing signs, creating a dance of meaning that brought tears to many eyes. When James began his vows, his voice strong and clear for the hearing guests, his hands spoke to Sarah alone. "I promise to be your partner in all things, to learn new signs every day if that's what it takes to tell you how much I love you. I promise to be your voice when you need one, your silence when you don't, and your steadfast companion always. Where others saw barriers, I found bridges. Where they heard silence, I discovered a symphony of understanding." Sarah's response came in graceful signs, Catherine translating aloud for the hearing guests. "I promise to share my world with you, to show you that love needs no words to be understood. You didn't try to fix me or change me. You learned my language, walked into my silence, and made it feel like home. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes together, our hands speaking what our hearts have always known." The exchange of rings carried special meaning, each band a tangible symbol of their commitment to communicate in all ways possible. As James slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, he added an unplanned gesture, signing "my heart," so quickly that only she caught it. Her answering smile illuminated the barn more brilliantly than any lantern. Judge Harrison's pronouncement of their marriage was signed simultaneously by Catherine, but it was the spontaneous eruption of both spoken cheers and waving hands that truly celebrated their union. The ranch hands had created their own sign for the occasion, combining joy and forever in a way that made Catherine laugh with delight at their creativity. At the reception, deaf and hearing guests mingled freely, communication flowing through a mixture of signs, written words, and gestures. Sarah's father surprised everyone by delivering his toast in perfect sign language, his heartfelt words about love transcending all barriers, moving both communities equally. Later, as they shared their first dance, Sarah guided James's hands to her waist so she could feel the music's vibrations through his body. They moved together in the lantern light, their shadows merging on the barn wall like their lives had merged. Two languages, two worlds, becoming one. The wedding bands caught the light as they danced, their engraved hands eternally signing love in silent eloquence. These rings would witness their journey together, their promise to keep learning each other's languages, to keep building bridges across silence. They were more than jewelry. They were a testament to the truth Sarah and James had discovered together, that love's deepest messages need no voice to be heard. The hand-built addition to the ranch house stood as a testament to their first months of marriage, a seamless blend of old and new, just like their life together. James had designed it with Sarah's input, incorporating elements that spoke to both their needs: extra wide windowsills for better light when signing, a specially positioned mirror in the kitchen that allowed Sarah to see approaching visitors through their reflections, and a solid oak floor that carried vibrations clearly. But it was the room they called the teaching space that truly embodied their vision, built with high windows and clever crossbeams that created perfect sightlines from any angle. It was designed to host the sign language classes that had grown from informal gatherings into regular community events. "Never thought I'd see Cal. Matthew's learning to sign," James commented one evening, watching through the window as the gruffest rancher in the territory carefully practiced finger spelling with his young daughter. "Says his girl wants to be a teacher like you," Sarah smiled, setting down the lesson plans she'd been preparing. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. Children don't see barriers, only possibilities. The Kai addition had become more than just extra space. It was a symbol of how their marriage had expanded beyond themselves to touch the wider community. Every Saturday, the teaching space filled with a mix of deaf and hearing students. Ranch hands sat beside shopkeepers' wives, all learning to bridge the gap between their worlds. Sarah's methods combined her Boston education with practical frontier needs. She taught signs useful for ranch work alongside more traditional lessons, creating a unique vocabulary that spread through the territory. James often found himself translating at cattle auctions now, as more ranchers adopted their innovative, silent communication systems with livestock. Their home life developed its own beautiful rhythm. James had installed a system of colored glass panels near the windows, Sarah's idea, inspired by her mother's garden. Different times of day cast different colored shadows, helping her track time without need for clocks or bells. The kitchen garden flourished under her care, with herbs and vegetables arranged in patterns that pleased both eye and hand. One morning, as they shared breakfast in their sun-filled kitchen, Sarah noticed James's hands trembling slightly as he signed. "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby." The news transformed their home again. The teaching space gained a corner filled with toys and children's books, while Sarah began developing signs specifically for infant care. Catherine sent a trunk full of resources from her school, including guides for raising children in both deaf and hearing worlds. "Our child will never feel caught between worlds," Sarah signed one night as they stood in the future nursery. "They'll know both languages from the start, like you did with Catherine." James pulled her close, his hand resting gently over their growing child. "They'll know love in all its languages," he promised. The addition's walls soon echoed with new activity as expectant mothers from town joined Sarah's classes, eager to learn signs for communicating with infants before they learned to speak. Mrs. Henderson, now a fluent signer herself, often remarked how the ranch house had become the heart of the community in ways no one could have predicted. Their influence spread beyond Wild River. Other ranches began adopting their methods for handling stock, and James found himself traveling to demonstrate their silent communication system at territorial fairs. Sarah's careful documentation of their techniques caught the attention of agricultural journals, leading to correspondence with ranchers across the West. But it was the personal transformations that meant the most. Thomas Wheeler's daughter, Mary, became one of their most dedicated students, her initial shyness blooming into confidence as she mastered sign language. Her father, watching her sign animated stories to Sarah's growing belly, finally understood what he had almost prevented: the growth of a community where differences enriched rather than divided. The addition's completion coincided with the first snow of winter, its warm wooden walls glowing with lamplight during the long evening classes. Sarah often paused in her teaching to watch James demonstrate signs to new students, his patient hands shaping the same care he had shown her from the beginning. One evening, after the students had left, and they sat together by the fire, Sarah took James's hand and placed it against the wall of their addition. "Feel that?" she signed with her free hand. "The house is humming with all the new signs being learned, all the stories being shared." James smiled, understanding. Like their life together, this space they had built was more than the sum of its parts. It was a bridge between silence and sound, a testament to the truth they lived every day, that the strongest foundations are built not just of wood and nails, but of understanding and acceptance. The addition would continue to grow with their family, its walls gathering layers of memory, like the rings of a tree. But its heart would always be that first vision they had shared, a place where two worlds could meet, learn from each other, and create something beautiful in the sharing. The school bell's clear tone rang out across Wild River for the first time on a bright September morning, though Sarah felt rather than heard its vibrations through the newly constructed schoolhouse walls. The brass bell, a gift from her father, bore an inscription that captured their dream. In silence and in sound, knowledge speaks to all. 5 years had passed since that first sign language class in their ranch house addition. Now, standing before the purpose-built school for deaf children, Sarah cradled their 2-year-old daughter Grace while James rang the bell. Grace, equally fluent in sign and speech like her father, clapped her tiny hands at the sight of students. Arriving, the schoolhouse represented everything they'd worked for. Its design incorporated all they'd learned about creating spaces where deaf and hearing students could learn together. Large windows filled the rooms with natural light. Wooden floors were engineered to carry vibrations clearly, every detail. From the curved seating arrangement to the specialized visual aids served their vision of inclusive education. Ready? James signed, after passing the bell rope to young Tommy, now head ranch hand and the school's unofficial caretaker. Sarah nodded, her heart full, as she watched the first students arrive. They came not just from Wild River, but from ranches and towns across the territory. Some were deaf, others hearing siblings or friends. All were eager to be part of this unprecedented experiment in frontier education. The school's first teacher besides Sarah was Mary Wheeler, Thomas's daughter, who had spent the past 3 years studying at Catherine's school in Maryland. Her father's opposition had transformed into such passionate support that he'd funded her education himself, and now stood beaming proudly as she welcomed students in fluid sign language. Inside the schoolhouse, the morning sun illuminated carefully. Crafted teaching aids, charts showed both English words and their signed equivalents. A special slate board had been imported from Boston, its surface optimized to reduce glare. But the heart of the room was the library corner, where books in English sat alongside illustrated sign language guides, many created by Sarah herself. Their own daughter moved easily between both worlds. Grace had inherited her father's hearing, but also her mother's expressive hands, often serving as a natural bridge between deaf and hearing children. Now she wriggled from Sarah's arms to join the other students, her signs and voice flowing together as she made new friends. Sarah remembered her own childhood loneliness in Boston, the isolation of being the only deaf student in her classes. Here, no child would feel that separation. The curriculum she'd developed with Catherine's help combined traditional subjects with innovative teaching methods that engaged all students, regardless of their hearing status. The school bell's inaugural ring had drawn most of Wild River to watch. Even Thomas Wheeler dabbed at his eyes as his granddaughter, Mary's little girl, toddled up the schoolhouse steps, holding hands with a deaf boy from a neighboring ranch. The sight embodied everything the school stood for, breaking down barriers before they could take root. James had surprised Sarah that morning with a special addition to the school's entrance, a hand-carved sign that read, "The Eleanor Blackwood, School for the Deaf," honoring the mother who had first taught Sarah that education could bridge any gap. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Where silence and sound meet in understanding." As the first lesson began, Sarah stood at the front of the room, every child's eyes fixed attentively on her hands. She had waited for this moment to share something special, a new sign she and James had created specifically for their school. It combined the gestures for learn, together, and grow, flowing into a single graceful movement that the children quickly embraced with enthusiasm. The bell would ring many times that first day, marking periods and breaks, but its most important toll had been that first one, announcing to the territory that education knew no barriers of silence or sound. Each ring carried the message that Sarah and James had lived every day of their marriage, that understanding could bridge any divide, that love could teach new languages, that dreams could transform a community. Later that evening, after the students had gone home and the excitement had quieted, Sarah and James stood in the empty schoolhouse. Grace had fallen asleep in her father's arms, her small hands still forming signs from her dreams. Sarah touched the bell's smooth surface, feeling the lingering vibrations of its historic day. Mother would be proud, she signed with her free hand. She always said education was the key to bringing worlds together. James shifted Grace gently to sign back. She'd be proud of you. You've given these children what she gave you, the chance to be heard in their own way. The school bell would become more than just a timekeeper. It would stand as a symbol of possibility, its clear tone calling future generations to learn that the strongest lessons often came without words, that the truest education spoke to both heart and mind, that understanding could ring out in silence as clearly as in sound. The new carpetbag sitting in Sarah's office was nearly identical to the one she'd carried west 10 years ago, but this time it belonged to Emma Collins, a 16-year-old deaf girl from Boston, clutching a worn newspaper clipping about the Eleanor Blackwood School for the Deaf. The sight stirred memories that made Sarah's heart ache with recognition. "I read about your school," Emma signed, her Boston-styled gestures reminding Sarah of her own younger self. "About how you teach both deaf and hearing students together, about the ranching program." Her fingers trembled slightly. "My father said I was chasing foolish dreams, but you came anyway," Sarah finished for her, smiling warmly. "Just like I did." The girl's carpetbag held the same hopes and fears Sarah had carried a decade ago. But Emma was arriving at a very different wild river. Where Sarah had found isolation, Emma would find a thriving deaf community. Where there had been prejudice, there was now understanding. Where there had been silence, there was now a symphony of signed and spoken languages dancing together. James appeared in the doorway, their daughter Grace perched on his shoulders. At 8 years old, Grace moved effortlessly between the deaf and hearing worlds, her natural gift for languages making her a bridge, just like her father. Behind them came Mary Wheeler, now the school's co-principal, her own daughter Rebecca already signing a welcome to the new student. "Show her the ranch?" James signed to Sarah, his hands still as graceful in their movements as the day he'd first learned to sign "thank you." The Double C had grown into something unique in the territory, a working ranch that doubled as a training ground for deaf students interested in agricultural work. Their innovative, silent communication methods had spread across the West, adopted by ranchers who recognized the value of visual signals in handling stock. As they walked the familiar paths, Sarah watched Emma's eyes grow wide at the sight of deaf and hearing ranch hands working seamlessly together, their signs flowing as naturally as speech. In the corrals, a group of students was learning horse handling using the techniques Sarah had developed, their confident movements showing no trace of the barriers society had tried to place between them. "I never knew it could be like this," Emma signed, her face glowing with possibility. "Back home, they said—" "I know what they said," Sarah interrupted gently. "They said the same to me. But look around you. Every person here is proof that they were wrong. The school had grown beyond their wildest dreams. Students came from across the country, drawn by the unique combination of traditional education and practical ranch training. The teaching space that had started in their home addition had expanded into a full campus, where deaf and hearing children learned side by side, each enriching the other's world. That evening, as the family hosted a welcome dinner for Emma, the ranch house buzzed with a mixture of signed and spoken conversations. The shy girl from Boston sat surrounded by students eager to share their stories, her initial nervousness melting away in the warmth of acceptance. Sarah stood by the window, watching the scene unfold. James joined her, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Remembering your first night in Wild River?" he signed. She nodded, squeezing his fingers. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "But look what that fear led to, everything we've built together." Their legacy had grown beyond just the school and ranch. They'd created a model for other communities, proving that barriers of silence and sound could be bridged with understanding and patience. Former students now taught in schools across the country, spreading the methods and acceptance they'd learned at the Blackwood School. Grace appeared between them, tugging at their hands to join the gathering. She'd inherited Sarah's determination and James's gentle strength, along with both their languages. Looking at her daughter now, confidently translating for newer students still learning to sign, Sarah felt the full circle of their journey. Later, after the guests had gone and Emma had been settled in the student boarding house, Sarah found the girl's carpetbag still sitting in her office. She touched it gently, remembering another autumn evening when a deaf girl from Boston had arrived with nothing but hope and determination. "Welcome home," she signed to the empty room, knowing that Emma, like so many others, would find here what Sarah herself had discovered, that sometimes the greatest journeys led not to places but to possibilities. That love could teach new languages. That courage could build bridges across any silence. As she walked home through the starlit ranch yard, Sarah felt the vibrations of distant horse hooves through the earth, the steady rhythm of the life she and James had built together. Their story had become larger than themselves, a testament to the truth they'd learned that first day at the train station, that some hearts spoke louder than words ever could. The new carpetbag would join Sarah's old one in the school's small museum, artifacts of journeys that had transformed not just lives, but an entire community. Between them lay a decade of growth, of love, of proving that the strongest connections were forged not in sound or silence, but in the understanding hearts. Quiet fluency,